Hi, I'm Ruben Saltzman with Structure Tech Home Inspections, and today I'm going to cover venting for high-efficiency furnaces. As a home inspector, it's my job to look at the venting on any furnace, but today I'm going to cover some of the stuff that we look at as home inspectors when we're looking at high-efficiency furnaces. Those are the furnaces that use basically a plumbing drain, typically PVC, to get the exhaust gases out of the home. Usually you'll see a couple of PVC pipes sticking out the side of the house. One is to exhaust the exhaust gas, and the other is to bring in fresh air for combustion. You're going to have an intake and an exhaust, and they usually terminate right next to each other on the side of the house. If you have a couple of those pipes, you probably have a high efficiency furnace. And manufacturers have special requirements on how to vent these things. And as a home inspector, I've gotten into a lot of discussions with other home inspectors on just how far we should go in figuring out whether the venting was installed properly or not. You know, as an example, if we had a vent that terminated inside of the house, or it had a hole in the vent and allowed exhaust gas to escape into the house, that would clearly be something that we would write up and we'd say this is a defect. Now, if we have a vent that's terminating right next to an openable window, should we write that up as a safety hazard? I think probably. Most home inspectors would do that. But what about if the venting has too long of an equivalent run? What if the manufacturer says you can only run this vent for 50 feet and they ran it for 60 feet? Should I try to figure that out as a home inspector? We're going to dig into some of that today. All right, before we get started, let me just start with some definitions. For a high efficiency furnace, there's two ways to install it. You could either have a direct vent or a non-direct vent. If it's a direct vent, you're going to have the two pipes that I talked about. If it's a non-direct vent, it means that you only have one pipe. You take the combustion air directly from inside the house, and then you exhaust the burnt air directly to the outdoors. That is a non-direct vent. I'm going to mostly focus on direct vent furnaces because that's most of what we see installed here in Minnesota, but I do want to say it is acceptable to have a one-pipe system. That is perfectly legal to do that. We just don't see nearly as many of them. So to start off as a home inspector, one of the things I look at first is making sure that the intake is in and the output is out. I want to make sure that the installer got these pipes right. It matters because the intake is always going to be a pipe coming out of the side of the house, and it's going to point down. I say always coming out the side of the house. It could terminate at the roof too. Not as common, but it happens. Wherever it comes out, the pipe needs to point down. And the reason is that we don't want rainwater or anything else just dumping into this pipe coming into the air intake on the furnace. Now, for the exhaust pipe, it's perfectly fine to have the pipe just stick right out the side of the house, and it's okay if water gets in there because it's designed to handle condensate. It's no big deal if a little bit of extra water gets in that pipe. And when you have the exhaust and the intake coming out the side of the house, we always want to make sure that the exhaust gas will rise up and leave and go away, and that the intake will be sucking intake air in much lower than the exhaust. So that's why it's important to make sure that the installers didn't accidentally get these flipped around. And to make sure of that, we simply turn the furnace on, we make it run for a little while, we go outside, and we make sure that there's exhaust air coming out of the higher pipe. Now, sometimes furnace installers will want to use something called a concentric vent. It's basically, it looks like a single pipe coming out the side of the house, but it's really the two pipes merged together inside the home. They merge these two together, and then you've got the exhaust coming out the middle, and then on the back side of it, you've got the intake. And because the exhaust gets pushed out and the intake comes from back here, the two shall never mix with each other. They will not mix. And these work very well. It's a little bit of a cleaner installation. You only have one hole in the siding, a bigger hole, but one hole in the siding instead of two. And the other thing I'm looking at is proper clearances to stuff on the outside of the house. Every furnace manufacturer is going to have an installation manual with a diagram that looks something similar to this one. They're going to show all of these different clearances to different portions of the house. And the stuff that I'm most focused on is going to be clearances to inside corners. We want to make sure that we don't have a vent and an intake right next to an inside corner, because wind swirling around in there might cause some of the exhaust gas to get pulled back into the intake. We want to make sure the terminal isn't too close to soffits, especially soffit intakes. It's not too close underneath a deck, and it's not too close to windows or doors. Now, they've got different listings. They say the clearance requirements for openable windows and non-openable windows, but I think every manual I've ever looked at has the same clearance requirements for either one. So they're kind of clear that they don't care whether a window can be opened or not. I think the thinking there is that someday somebody may replace a non-openable window with an openable window, and we wouldn't want to have a safety hazard because somebody may not know that it's too close to a furnace vent. So if it's a direct vent furnace, that clearance requirement is at least 1 foot. Now, if it's a non-direct, I'm not going to get into all the specifics. There's a lot of requirements here, but when I first started doing home inspections, I would make a habit of grabbing the furnace installation manual, and I would just bring it outside with me, and I'd look over this diagram, and I'd go this, 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 and I'd look back and forth at what the furnace manufacturer required and what was done. And I started to find that just about all the manufacturers had all the same requirements, and all of this stuff just kind of became rote. And at some point, I stopped bringing manuals outside with me just because I kind of had it all down by memory. But I think it is important for us as home inspectors to look at all these clearances, make sure they are all met, and on the intake and the exhaust, make sure that they've done it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Another thing we look at is the pitch of the vent. There should never be any dips in the vent that could allow water to just sit, because that could potentially block the vent. However, we should never say never. I actually just recently ran across a furnace installation manual. It was on my furnace. I was browsing through my own manual, and the manufacturer actually does allow for dips in the piping, provided you put a drain at the lowest point in that dip, and then you have a condensate trap. It's all very goofy. I've never seen anything like this done, but it goes back to the point, never say never. Some manufacturers actually may allow this if you provide some special provisions, but you should never see a pipe dip and have a place for water to just accumulate, because again, like I said, it could block the vent. And also, the vent should always pitch downwards towards the furnace for the entire run. It should never pitch down towards the outdoors. And the concern there is that you're going to have condensate coming out, and over a long winter, that condensate could create a very unwanted ice sculpture in your yard, and it could actually interfere with the venting of the furnace. So the vent always needs to pitch back towards the furnace. Okay, last item to cover is sizing of the vents. Now, a lot of home inspectors will say that totally goes beyond what we ought to be doing as home inspectors, but I say it's not that big of a deal to do this. Now, we don't take the time to size every furnace vent. I don't want to give you the wrong idea here, but we do use kind of a general rule that if a furnace is rated at 80,000 BTUs or less, we're probably fine using a 2-inch pipe. If it's rated at 100,000 BTUs or more, we're probably going to need to step it up to a 3-inch pipe. And when it's an 80,000 BTU or 100,000 BTU furnace, I may take a little bit closer look at the venting. I may even open up the manual and just kind of see what the manufacturer wants and just give it a quick little eyeball and say, maybe we've got about 10 feet, 30 feet, so that's 40, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4 elbows, and each elbow might be worth 5 feet. So we'll tack that on and say we've got a run of maybe 80 equivalent feet, and the manufacturer says max 150. Okay, we're good, no big deal. But in some cases, it gets really close. There are some things that really make us want to do some exact measurements. There was one that I ran across recently where we had done an inspection on this house. It was a big house. I think it was around 4,000 square feet, and that means they're probably going to have a fairly large furnace. It had 2-inch venting, and the humidifier installer, somebody installed a whole house humidifier on the front of the furnace, which, side note, it's always better to put that humidifier over the return, not over the furnace, but that's for another day. They had put the humidifier right above the furnace, and they had to move the vents. The vents went straight up, so they had to put an elbow here, and then another elbow, and then another elbow, and then another elbow. So they had all these extra elbows. And I thought, with the size of this house and this modified installation, I wonder if they now have too long of an equivalent run on that venting. So we just took a minute and we opened up the furnace installation manual, and we said, all right, we've got a 80,000 BTU furnace. They do allow 2-inch piping, and it's a maximum of 70 equivalent feet. Now, 70 equivalent feet means the total length of the piping plus all of the reductions you need to make for all of the elbows. And we totaled up all the elbows. There was a total of 7 of them, and they used a mix of long sweep and short sweep elbows. And there's even a third type of elbow that they didn't use, which is a vent elbow. It's a vent 90. It's a really tight elbow. And all of these different elbows are worth different equivalent lengths. And just to make the math really easy, we just said, let's throw in 5 for each one. So we had 7 of them. Each was worth 5 feet. That'd be a total of 35 feet. And then we approximately measured the run, and we had a run of about 25 feet. So we came up with an equivalent run of somewhere around 60 feet, and we went, okay, we are perfectly fine here. We are well within the furnace manufacturer's parameters. There's not a problem. But if they had ran it out the other side of the house, which would have been a much longer run, that would have been a problem. So the whole calculation, looking all of this up, probably took us about 2 to 3 minutes. It wasn't really that big of a deal. And as a home inspector, if there's something I see that I'm questioning, I wouldn't hesitate to take a little bit of extra time to do a little bit of extra calculating and make sure that we're not looking at a problem. Now, I have not covered everything that could possibly go wrong with a high efficiency furnace vent, but this list covers most of the most common stuff that we run across. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.